Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to get started this morning, so if you could find your seats. Just one more housekeeping. We're going to have a wireless mic. When we do our workshops, we'll have a wireless mic, so when you want to ask questions, we'll be able to walk around. We're not going to have cards today. We're going to have a microphone, so a little bit of change there. For those of you that weren't here the last couple of days, my name is Mark Gran. I'm the chairman for the program committee for this summit. And I'm also a city councilman for the city of Imperial, and I own Strictly Business Development Consulting, so come see me if you're getting ready to do a project. That was a little shameless plug there. For those of you that were here yesterday, I was the guy in the tuxedo. I wasn't wearing the hat. Today I'm back in my normal attire, so many of you now recognize me. So the first person that we're going to have come up today is Mr. Tim Kelly. And Mr. Kelly is the president of the Imperial Valley Economic Development Corporation. And most of you know him, so I won't go through his whole bio, but he joined IBEDC in April of 2005. And in his current position, he is responsible for the implementation of the region's strategic economic development plan. So if I could have Mr. Tim Kelly come on up to the mic, and then he will be introducing the panel and moving forward for this morning's program. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Thanks a lot for everybody being here today. This is a very important panel. We view the Salton Sea, I think a lot of people externally view the Salton Sea as a real problem. We see it as an opportunity. And so this panel is designed to talk about some of the updates that are occurring at the Salton Sea, and then talk about some of those opportunities. I think you'll find that there's a lot more going on than what people think. And it's almost on a regular basis, daily, that we work with a company that is either looking at the Imperial County or is looking at Riverside County as a location for their business. And so it's our job to kind of help put that in place, and I think you'll be able to reveal a lot of good information about that. Just a little bit of housekeeping. How many of you are going to the air show tomorrow? Blue Angels Air Show. Okay. We have tickets for a chalet that IBDC is sponsoring. It's the only way you see the air show. There will be food, drinks throughout the day, shade, and seats. If you'd like a ticket, then you need to see me, and we'll sign you up, and you can come in anytime you want, but it's a really great way to see the air show. So make sure you come see me or Jennifer, and she has the tickets, but we do need to put your name on a list. In addition to that, Mr. Hanks is not able to be here today. They're involved with some negotiations, part of it pertaining to the Salton Sea. And so he asked Ryan Kelly to go ahead and take his place. But let me introduce the panel really quick, and I'll have them come forward. First of all, we have Ryan Kelly, Supervisor, Imperial County Board of Supervisors, District 4, and Secretary of the Salton Sea Board of Directors, Salton Sea Authority Board of Directors. Ryan was elected to represent District 4, Brawley, Bombay Beach, Calipatria, Desert Shores, Nyland, Salton Sea Beach, Vista Del Mar, and Westmoreland. Come on up, Ryan. And Ryan's going to go ahead and give our welcoming remarks, and then I'll introduce the rest of the panel.
Welcoming remarks. Well, hello. I am Ryan Kelly. You may not know who I am, but yes, I am the brother of Kevin Kelly and the cousin of Tim Kelly. If you played golf on Wednesday, that has no bearing on any prizes or any, but there is no special treatment between our family, just to put it out there. There's a saying in my family that anyone can cut you with words, but only another Kelly can cut you to the bone. So we are our own worst critics, and we express that vocally almost daily. Of a year ago, I was an attendee here in the audience like you, and at that time I was a candidate seeking the supervisor seat, which I now hold. And also I was asking for campaign support from your businesses and membership. Unfortunately, none of you gave to my campaign. So think about that for a minute. But seriously, I'm proud to be here at the Renewable Energy Summit. It provides an opportunity for us to gauge where we're at and where we need to go. The Salton Sea panel discussion that will be occurring, that's the point where we can see where we need to go. The Salton Sea has been an item on the minds of local residents, businesses, industry for a long time, and I think that we have a new opportunity. Now, I'm not a financing expert, I'm not a developer, nor a conservation planner. I am a lifelong North Imperial County resident, and in prior years, I was a recreational enthusiast. I spent a lot of time at Red Hill, Sonny Bono, and I want to continue to be able to do that with my children. As one of the newest members of the Salton Sea Authority, I'm pleased to see a conflagration of interest and momentum. The Salton Sea Authority began in '93 as a joint powers between Imperial and Riverside County, and has now expanded to take in the Torres Martinez Band. We now have all the jurisdictions represented on the authority that represent the shoreline. And after years of headbanging in Sacramento and Washington, I'm optimistic about the future of the sea. It is our backyard, and we need to take ownership. And we should lead that effort. The first course of action is to get our local objectives agreed upon. And then to get the state and federal government to come along and join the bandwagon. We cannot wait for them to lead us to water. We have the water, we need to lead them to the solution. The restoration effort needs to be led in one voice in concert, loud and constant. We've had multiple years of studies and plans. We need to focus on where we can make a change that will have a lasting impact for the betterment of our communities, for the employment opportunities, for the standard of living, for our health. Imperial County and Imperial Irrigation District are now negotiating a mutually agreed upon path to restoration. And it won't be easy, but nothing worthwhile ever is. But we have, as I mentioned, a momentum that's building from the Department of Interior Secretary Salazar's visit, Barbara Boxer, the burping of hydrogen sulfide that was smelled in the Inland Empire of Riverside and San Bernardino. It's brought focus onto the sea and what can be done to bring it back. With Assembly members Manuel Perez and Brian Nestande are helping us with that. There's a few Assembly bills that are before and being proposed that will give the Salton Sea Authority direct funding that will allow the Salton Sea Authority to be the decision maker and take the lead on the restoration efforts. We need to support those efforts. We need to support those bills, and we need to be constant and loud in that support. I see renewable energy involved in every possible solution to the Salton Sea restoration, be it geothermal, solar, biodiesel, algae, any other project that benefits our community and provides a piece of the restoration funding. Notice I said a piece. I don't believe anyone believes that industry development along the sea is going to be the complete funding solution for the restoration. Just an element. And we need to examine what those elements are. Where can we find the funding? We're doing that right now. It will take a combination of sources, and they're being discussed today. Just as solar fields were imagined 5 years ago in this room, I see similar tangible construction in the South Sea in 5 years' time. And it takes a will of the group assembled here to see that to fruition. So now is the time where I'm going to put a little levity into this. My cousin gave me the green light on telling a joke. So this is an Irish joke that kind of relates to what's been happening with the Salton Sea. The Dublin Corporation went out to solicit bids on a roadway project. And so they had three construction firms that were selected. And they came in for an interview with the panel. The first one that comes in is a man from Kerry. And they say, well, we've seen your bid, and you have a bid of $3 million to do this road. How do you come to such a figure? And the man from Kerry says, well, $3 million, that's for time, labor, and all me expenses. He says, oh, very good. We'll let you know. So they invite the next man in. He comes from Cork. They say, well, we've seen your bid. You come to 6 million pounds to do this road. How do you come to such a figure? He says, well, that's time, labor, expenses. Oh, okay. Well, we'll get back to you. They invite the third fellow in. This man's from Galway. They say, well, we've seen your bid. Your bid's 9 million pounds. How do you come to such a figure? That's astronomical. He says, well, first of all, there'll be 3 million pounds for myself. Second, there'll be 3 million pounds for yourself. And third, we'll pay the poor dumb bastard from Kerry to do the damn work. All right, so that's kind of like the $9 billion story for Salton Sea restoration from state of California. We need to take ownership of the restoration efforts. We need to be the lead, and I believe that we have the chance now. We don't have a lot of time to do any more studies, to wait for some big entity to come along and pick us up and take us along. We need to be the ones that are driving that. And I'm focused on doing that. And I know that entities that have just begun, like the Salton Sea Action Committee, the relationship with Manny Perez and AB 71, the Brian Estandi with his proposed legislation to give authority and funding directly back to the authority and allow the authority to make those decisions. All those things are happening today. And it's taken a while, but we are now running out of time. We need to take action. So I welcome you, and I welcome this discussion on the Salton Sea. And remember, I ask for you to speak with one loud and constant voice. And your support is needed. And I hope it's greater than to my campaign.
All right, if I could have the rest of the panels come up to the stage, and I'll be introducing you. Our next speaker is going to be Rebecca Baxter. She's the field representative for Assemblyman V. Manuel Perez, District Office in El Centro, where she has worked for the last 4 years. Assemblymember Perez represents the 56th Assembly District, which comprises of cities and communities in eastern Riverside and Imperial counties. Next we'll have Dr. George Nitschke. He is the president of Good Earth Mechanics, LLC, George Nitschke completed his doctorate in mechanical engineering, renewable energy in 2006 and formed Good Earth Mechanics. And George is working on a project that we hope will come to fruition at the Salton Sea. I think you'll find that very interesting. And then we will have Bruce Wilcock, Manager of Environmental Mitigation Program, Imperial Irrigation District, San Diego County Water Authority, Water Transfer. Bruce is the guy we call at the IID when we have projects that are going to be, that have a possibility of taking place around the Salton Sea, and has been very helpful, not only in the Imperial County, but also in the Riverside County and those areas that surround the Salton Sea. And then finally, we'll have my friend Juan Delara, President of the Salton Sea Action Committee. And Juan Delara is the Risk Asset Manager for Federated Insurance. He oversees more than 2,700 acres and over $100 million in real estate assets in Coachella Valley. Juan's been a good friend of the Imperial County. I've known him since he was on the City Council of Coachella. And his project, Tavertine Point, is going to make a drastic improvement to the Salton Sea and bring economic development to that region. So if we could start off with Rebecca. Ryan decided to defer and not show his PowerPoint presentation unless he would like to. No, he does not. Okay, Rebecca, thank you.
Well, thank you so much. Good morning, everybody. Hope you're all enjoying the summit so far and that you have an enjoyable rest of the day. First and foremost, I just want to once again introduce myself. I'm Rebecca Terrazas Baxter, Senior Field Representative for Assemblymember Manuel Perez, who represents this district, the 56th District. I'm here on behalf of Assemblymember Perez to provide you with brief information on one of the Assembly members' legislative proposals for this legislative session. As our County Supervisor Kelly had referenced earlier, we do have AB 71, but there's another proposal that I'd like to share with you. Before I talk to you about the bill, I wanted to just share some information with you about the renewable energy potential of the Salton Sea and why we felt the need for this bill. Currently, the Salton Sea has 10 geothermal power plants with a generating capacity of 326 megawatts, a fraction of the sea's total geothermal potential. In 2005, the California Energy Commission concluded that a total generating potential of the Salton Sea field was 1,750 megawatts. Many more commission studies on the energy generating potential of the Salton Sea field conclude that the sea could generate between 1,400 megawatts to 2,000 megawatts. All those studies have ranged in their estimates, all confirm that the area's potential is a geothermal mecca. In addition to geothermal energy, the Salton Sea has shown incredible potential as a source of biofuels. While everyone recognizes there's a lot of renewable energy potential at the Salton Sea, it is still unclear which renewable energy source will more likely thrive at the Salton Sea Basin region due to the concern of the soil and the various elements in the sea. Another unknown is what it will take to commercialize these resources. Recognizing these unknowns and in an effort to address these issues, Assemblymember Perez introduced AB 148. AB 148 authorizes the Secretary of the Natural Resources Agency, in consultation and coordination with the Salton Sea Authority, to establish the Salton Sea Renewable Energy and Biofuel Research and Development Program to meet economic and environmental goals by providing grants for eligible commercial enterprises and research institutions to facilitate research and the commercial development of the Salton Sea's vast renewable energy and biofuel resources. The intent is to create a funding stream to mitigate dust pollution and help offset costs associated with the sea's long-term restoration. This bill is one part of Assemblyman Perez's Save Our Sea campaign, which takes a multi-level approach to assist and advance restoration efforts of the sea. The Save Our Sea campaign includes two other bills, which one of them was referenced earlier, AB 71, the Salton Sea Restoration Governance, and the other is AB 147, Salton Sea Air Pollution Mitigation Act. With an issue of this magnitude and complexity, there is obviously no silver bullet to fixing the sea. Assemblymember Perez's hope, though, is that by working together with all stakeholders, we will make 2013 the year we get on track to save the Salton Sea while tapping into the renewable energy potential of the sea. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rebecca, and make sure you thank Manny for us for his great work in supporting us in our endeavors at the Salton Sea. Our next speaker is going to be Bruce Wilcock with the IID. Okay. And I want to thank Connor, right here, our IT specialist in the middle, helping us out on loan from the Imperial Valley Community Foundation. Thank you.
Good morning. First, thank you for inviting us here today to speak. My role at IID is to manage the environmental program for the water transfer. Pardon me. And there is a couple people that I'd like to thank before we get started. First, the past and present board of IID has been very supportive in everything we've done to this point, and we appreciate that very much. The general manager, Mr. Kelly, Kevin Kelly, a lot of Kellys here today, has also been very supportive, and it makes our job a lot easier. And then the people that actually do the work, Kelly Bishop is in the audience and Victor Montoya are in the audience someplace. They work on our team and have actually done most of the work that we've got accomplished. Jessica Lavecchio is also on that team, and we made her work today. She couldn't come. They're out at the playa doing soil sampling. So those folks are the ones that when you hear about what I talk about today, they're responsible for most of that. So just briefly, I want to talk a little bit about the Salton Sea background to give you a sort of a place to evaluate the other things that you'll hear today, a little bit about the current status, the future, what we've got going on to this point, a long-range focus, and then a partnership and opportunities, which really speaks to the rest of the panel. I'm pretty lucky to be involved in this panel. There's a lot of wisdom and energy here, and between this panel and this afternoon's panel, they have a lot of innovative solutions that I think are going to make a big difference in the Salton Sea in the future. So I thought I'd start by talking a little bit about the sea and what it is. It's a terminal lake. It's the largest lake in California. And because it's a terminal lake, it has a few issues. Most of the runoff into the lake is from agriculture, and that runoff has slightly increased salinity and some nutrients. And because it's a closed basin lake, none of that can be discharged from the area, and all of it ends up through evaporation. We get about 6 acre-feet per acre per year. It concentrates the salts and the nutrients in the lake. So the lake continues to get saltier. It's at about 52 parts now. The projections say it will reach 60 parts by 2017 or 2018. So the salinity is an issue. There also is a bit of a concentration of selenium, although the sea itself isn't all that high in selenium. The Colorado River water that comes into the valley has a little selenium. Concentrations of that are also a problem. And when we talk about habitat, and in a minute you'll hear why that's even more of a problem. This is based on Landsat imagery, and it's a model of what the sea was like in 2000. IID and San Diego County Water Authority, over the course of the last year, have done some hydrology modeling to try and get an idea of what the sea exposure and the playa exposure will be. So that's the sea in 2000. There's the sea in 2015. I didn't have a model run for 2012 or 13, but you can see in the areas at the two river mouths, and then again at this end of the river and along these areas, this is exposed playa. And in a minute you'll see where we're talking to a lot of the folks. We're developing habitat for those areas. We're talking to George and other folks that have got some innovative ideas for those areas. One of our challenges, of course, is the dust mitigation in these areas. But we also have habitat concerns and recreational concerns at the sea. So here's the sea in 2045. A couple of caveats on this model. It is just that, a model, so it may or may not be correct. But most of the models we've seen, including the one the state did for their PEIR, show roughly the same amount of playa exposure in 2045. The playa exposure at that point levels off, and if you model through 2075 or so, you don't see a lot more playa exposure. What's caused the playa exposure? Several things. Mexico inflows have been reduced significantly. Mexico's reusing a lot of the water they used to discharge into the rivers, into the sea. The QSA, the water transfer, also contributes to an extent for the amount of playa that's exposed. What you see in that graphic is about 60,000 acres, plus or minus. If I think someplace between 10 and 15,000 acres would be exposed without the water transfer. You'll remember that the Salton Sea was a relatively stable water body in the 70s and early 80s, and then in the 90s it rose considerably to its high point in probably 93 or 94, and has been declining since then. It continues to decline. Our mitigation measures right now are geared to stabilize the trends, or in other words, maintain the trends of elevation decline and salinity through 2017. So most of the playa exposure you see out there today isn't a product of the water transfer. However, it is still an issue from an air emissions point of view, and something we spent a lot of time working on. So I wanted to talk now for just a few minutes about some of the projects we have started and we are working on, and then we'll circle back to some of the future projects and some of the innovative ideas we've got today, especially with renewable energy. One of the things we realized early on is that with the delays in Salton Sea restoration, and remember too that the water transfer mitigation plan to some extent has always assumed that there would be Salton Sea restoration. Legislatively, the state promised Salton Sea restoration. Most of us know that there's been some issues with funding on that, and that probably won't happen by 2017. So in the past 3 or 4 years in particular, we've reached out to a lot of other folks to try and help us with developing habitat and other mitigation measures at the sea. This is an example of some shoreline habitat, and one of the things we look at is how easily and how economically effective we can create this habitat. This is only about a 30 or 35 acre pool, but it was developed in a relatively small budget. I think the whole thing only cost about $45,000 or $50,000, which sounds like a fair amount of money, but it just is very expensive to do habitat restoration anywhere. This kind of shoreline habitat would fit in an incremental approach to Salton Sea restoration, which is one of the things we've been suggesting until the state is able to get the funding problem solved. This happens to be one of our partners in the north end, Torres Martinez. This is about a 100-acre, 150-acre parcel. The vegetated cells here are water treatment cells. The water goes through those, discharges into these two cells. You can see another cell under construction there. This is the Whitewater River Flood Control Channel, or the Whitewater River, depending on your terminology. This area has been very good waterfowl habitat, and it also addresses, as you can see, the playa exposure here. Most of these were created on exposed playa, so it also addresses the air quality issue. That's one of the other things that we've tried to do to the extent we can in the mitigation efforts, and then in the long-term restoration efforts, is trying to combine projects so they give us more than one benefit, in this case air quality and water quality and habitat. This area looks at, most of you are also probably aware, the state of California, under part of their Salton Sea Ecosystem Restoration Plan, has developed a series of smaller but still important species conservation habitat areas that really are fish habitat for the piscivorous birds, or the fish-eating birds. There's 4 of those areas that were considered in their environmental document, which I've been told will be public or final in the next month or less. These areas and these areas. I show you this for 2 reasons. One, the state gets a lot of flack for not moving forward with Salton Sea restoration, and they deserve some of that, quite frankly. They did make that promise. But in the last couple of years, DWR and now DFW, used to be DFG, have made a lot of progress on the development of this. I'm pleased to say that they've asked IID to help with the development of these areas, and we've done that to a large extent, and we've made a lot of progress. And I think in the next couple of years, you'll see some of these sort of areas built. The other thing that's important about this, and I hope this is the message of this entire workshop, both this morning and in the second panel, is the ability to partner with other folks who might have slightly divergent interests in some cases, but we can work together to make things work in the long term. These 4 alternative sites, you can imagine, I think the known geothermal area does something like this, more or less. And you folks in the audience that are more attuned to that probably will notice that I don't have it quite right, but I think that's close. And obviously, these areas here were a concern to the geothermal development, and rightfully so. So the state, IID, the geothermal folks, and the state worked together to get the area that most likely will be built down here around around the New River, at least on the edge of the known geothermal area and to the west. The little thumb that you see sticking out here is also something that they're not going to develop. I didn't have the newest plan, but because of concerns about geothermal resources, that thumb has been cut off. And I think that's a good example of how we partner together to make things work in the long run. The state's in a process right now of trying to secure the funding and the money for building this project. And I would encourage all of you to call your representative. And Assemblyman Perez, by the way, has been incredibly supportive to this point, and we really appreciate it. But it's time for the state legislature to fund these projects. Not next year. Tomorrow would be best, and we could probably wait till the end of next week if we had to, but they need to fund these areas. The other thing they need to do is pass AB 71. And they need to do that as soon as they can too, because as we talk about this incremental approach, and this will become evident as you hear all these other folks, there's a tremendous amount of moving parts in this, and we need someone like the Salton Sea Authority to coordinate and manage this. And we've worked closely with the Salton Sea Authority to this point, but AB 71 gives them a little more authority, a little more responsibility, and most importantly, gives them a little money to help with these sort of projects. And in order for this incremental approach to work until we can come up with a long-term funding plan, and I'm happy to say some people are working on that too, but until we can come up with that, these are the sort of projects we have to do, along with some of the alternative energy or renewable energy projects. And we need to partner with the private sector, and you'll hear from Juan in a few minutes about some of how the private sector has stepped up to the plate in this. But we really need to have a coordinating agency, and at least in my mind, that's the Salton Sea Authority. Oops. Here's another project, and again, this one demonstrates, I think, the level of cooperation we've received in the last couple of years. This is Red Hill Bay, and if I can back this up without screwing it up. Red Hill Bay is located right in this area. The aerial photograph's a couple years old. That area doesn't have much water in it right now. Oops. Red Hill Bay is a project that we're working on with U.S. Fish and Wildlife, with the geothermal, one of the geothermal companies, and with the state. And you'll notice that this is in one of the areas that originally the state wanted to put their species conservation habitat. But after long discussions with them and coordination, they have selected one of the other areas. U.S. Fish and Wildlife and IID and some other folks have developed a plan to reflood this area. This area emits a lot of small particle dust and a lot of salt dust because it's dry right now. We have a series of berms we're going to put in there short term to flood that area and provide shallow water habitat. To me, the most important thing in this though, is the fact that we've got a partnership developed with the geothermal folks. You heard me talk a few minutes ago about how renewable energy was a big part of this, and it is. But we need to be able to coexist with habitat and coexist with recreation, and this project will help prove that. It's got a photovoltaic component to it that's located in this area. That's part of our long-term study of photovoltaic on the Salton Sea Playa. And it also has it has access built, point to the wrong monitor, has access built into it for geothermal too. So we think this is a project that we think we can build in the next few years with some funding from the Department of Interior and others, and will demonstrate the ability to work together and move forward on locating renewable energy in these areas. So back to this is the 2047 or 2045 slide again. One of the issues, of course, is where do you put what from a point of view of restoration, and how do you do that so that you don't preclude any of the Salton Sea restoration plans that are out there. It's my belief that the state at some point will step back to the table and perform the Salton Sea restoration, but I think they need the help, whether it's federal help and state help and local help to move forward. So our charge or the constraint we have is to be able to do these incremental projects in a manner that doesn't preclude Salton Sea restoration full scale. And that includes a recreational component and other things too, and all of those components are important. So you'll notice that for the most part, the geothermal area is this area. For the most part, the area easiest to build habitat is this area, and that's because of the two rivers and the water sources off the drains for the habitat. Now, most of the habitat we're designing uses drain water. It does not use Colorado River water. So there is plenty of opportunity for some of the things like you'll hear from George to locate along these areas. There are constraints from a transmission point of view in those areas. But down here, we're trying to prove the concept of co-location of the different kinds of habitat and alternative energy. The north end has its own challenges. They've made a lot of progress up there, Torres Martinez in particular, but CVWD too. And one of the problems we have up in this area is less water. You can't build wetland habitat without water. It took us a few years to figure that out, but you can't. So we're going to have to build a habitat in these areas. So I promised to circle this back around to the concept of this entire meeting, the renewable energy, and this is the slide that attempts to do that. I think the things we need to do to move Salton Sea restoration forward are innovative long-term financing solutions. I know IID is working on that, I know the county is, and I know everyone else is, and I think that there are some opportunities for that out there. That's not a solution tomorrow, but it's a solution in the next 5 years or so, and we need to keep pushing on that. I think it's a state contribution, I think it's a federal contribution, and I think there's some other local contributions. The biggest message that I'd like to give today is the multiple stakeholders and partners. We've really developed a reasonably functional coalition of folks that are centered around the Salton Sea Authority and centered around what Juan will talk about in a few minutes with his organization, and we've made a lot of progress, and we continue to make that progress as long as we keep in mind that the overall goal is the same for all of us. I put the recreational component in there because I think I'm a habitat person, I'm an ecologist by training, but the recreational component is important to a lot of our partners, and that makes it important to us. So the recreational component has to be part of Salton Sea restoration. But in the interim period, the sustainable incremental habitat development and sustainable incremental air quality development, or mitigation development, is incredibly important because for the next couple of years, that's all we're going to have. I think we can make that work, but we're going to need some support and we're going to need some funding. Strategic land use development is also important as a part of this, and our mitigation plan calls out the use of reclamation of farmland and some other different land uses that we can use in some areas of the playa. The importance of that is, quite frankly, if you've got another land use on an exposed playa area, that means there won't be as much dust emission from that, and that's a plus in our mind. And then finally, and probably the one that interests most of you today, and the most exciting one from my perspective, because up until about 2 years ago, I didn't know all that much about renewable energy. I still don't in comparison to the folks on the panel, but I'm learning. But the manageable renewable energy development, whether it's geothermal, salinity gradient ponds, photovoltaic, is, we think, one of the ways that can not only cover parts of the playa and help with an air quality, but they can perhaps, with some innovative partnerships with the federal government, can actually generate some revenue. And we've worked with a lot of the folks, Septon Water Technology, we've worked with George and other folks, and we've got some pretty exciting ideas for what we might be able to do in those areas. And with that, I'll close and turn it over to George. Thank you. Thanks, Tim.
Thanks a lot, Bruce. That was a great overview of the Salton Sea. And this panel was designed to provide that information, but I was on a committee probably about 2005, 2006 with the Salton Sea Authority. Look at ways that they can finance the restoration. And you know, there's a lot of different ways to do that, but we do know, and it has been proven, that the federal government and the state government are not going to step in and provide the funding to take care of the things that need to be done at the Salton Sea. It's got to be done through economic development, the growth in population, and that's where the renewable energy comes in. So there are several projects that are being considered, and literally the taxes that will be generated from projects such as geothermal and other projects in the Salton Sea, we're talking about billions and billions of investment, which turns into tax dollars, which then can be used for the restoration. And so our next speaker is going to be talking about one of those projects that is coming to fruition.
Slides help. Thanks, Tim. My name is George Nitschke, and I'm with Good Earth Mechanics. And for the whole team, I want to thank you folks for allowing us the opportunity to tell you about one of our key technologies, salinity gradient solar ponds, and a concept for using solar ponds to help restore the Salton Sea. Voila. So we are proposing to use salinity gradient solar ponds as a commercial solution to restore and manage the Salton Sea that pays for itself. Simply put, the activity of building the solar ponds in the manner we're suggesting and selling the cost-effective solar pond power will produce sufficient financial margins to fund to enable the restoration of the sea itself. So the purpose of this presentation is to introduce you to the team and the technology and lay out our concept for what we're talking about here, and finally to touch on the idea of enterprise approach that's going to be needed to make it all work. So what are solar ponds and who is Jim? Salinity gradient solar ponds are solar thermal energy systems that are capable of producing base load or on-demand power 24/7 on a year-round basis. So we heard a lot about this in yesterday's talks about how this is a key need for renewables. We have all these intermittent holes we need to go fill in. So solar pond technology is kind of exciting in that role. It's very integratable. Solar ponds solve the intermittency and storage problems experienced by other renewables that can only deliver power when the wind blows or the sun shines. On price, GEM's solar pond technology is cost competitive with conventional products, including gas-fired plants, and several times cheaper than other solar energy systems. Now, a key synergy to the solar pond concept for the Salton Sea is that it requires a lot of salt to build these systems. In this latitude, we need about 150,000 tons of salt for every baseload megawatt we build. So that's a lot of salt, which is a good fit for Salton Sea because you guys have a lot of salt you need to get rid of in the sea. Lastly, the systems are scalable all the way down to 250 kW or up to hundreds of megawatts, whatever the case may call for. Just let me talk a little bit about how they work, not to bore you to tears with the technical aspects here, but salinity gradient solar ponds are essentially a shallow, salt stratified pond where the bottom of the pond is saturated salt water and the top of the pond is fresh, nearly fresh, and there's a gradient layer in between. What happens is the sunlight shines through the pond and heats up the bottom of the pond, which then in turn heats up that adjacent fluid. And now in a normal pond, that hot water would simply rise to the surface and cool down in a normal process. But given the fact that it's saturated salt water on the bottom of the solar pond, it can't rise because it's heavier than the fluid above it. So it just sits there on the bottom and gets hotter and hotter. And if you don't do something with that energy, it will literally boil. So what we do is we pump that nearly boiling hot brine off the bottom of the pond through an off-the-shelf heat engine, which uses that thermal energy to drive a generator to produce electricity, and then return that fluid back to the bottom of the pond to be reheated. Very simple process. But this is what allows us to deliver base load or on demand whenever we want year-round, day, night, rain, shine, winter, summer, because it's essentially just a big thermal battery. It's a collector, storage, and delivery system all in one. Now, one other key point to note, excuse me, I'm chasing a little cold here with antihistamines. We don't actually build big lakes. We build these systems in little modules, typically using 2 5 to 7 acre ponds to drive one 250 kW heat engine. And then we just add these modules together to scale up to whatever size power plant the site calls for. So, very simple process. Our team, our GEM Solar Pond team, are the original principals from the widely known solar pond development work at the University of Texas El Paso, which was funded by the Bureau of Reclamation. So our team for 16 years operated this developmental pond at UTEP, the UTEP site, learning everything from how best to establish and maintain that gradient, that's a very important piece of this, to how to deal with sand, dust, windstorms, bugs, day-night operations, winter, summer, et cetera, and including how to deal with the effects of an earthquake. We actually encountered an earthquake a few miles south of the UTEP site into Mexico during the development work, and we just happened to have one of our guys, this guy right here, in fact, Herb Hine, who some of you might actually know. He's been out here quite a bit. He was actually on site when it hit, and so he watched the pond slosh back and forth for a few minutes and finally settled out. And he went and got in that rowboat there, went out in the middle to check to see if the salinity gradient was in place, and it was. It stayed right there. So anyway, that experience might come in kind of handy around here in the Salton Sea area. I guess you guys have earthquakes once in a while. So while much of that learning experience was published, certainly you can't publish that firsthand experience. And it's that firsthand experience that our team is bringing to the table now to commercialize this very, very critical technology. In addition to a few things, secret sauce kind of stuff that we haven't published. A quick word on price. I apologize for the side chart. You can't see these numbers, but maybe, I think we're going to publish these briefings online, maybe, perhaps, so you can come back and look at this. If not, send me an email and I'll get you a copy of this. But as I said earlier, we project that solar pond power will be cost competitive with conventional products and several times cheaper than the other renewables. So what this slide does is it compares levelized cost across the conventional dispatchable technologies, coal, gas, nuclear, against the non-dispatchable or intermittent classical renewables of wind and PV. And all the levelized cost, capital cost, fixed O&M, variable O&M is tallied up here on the right-hand column. As you can see, we trade actually, I should stop and say right now, we put the solar pond data in here. This is an insert from us. These data, by the way, are the DOE's EIA data, Energy Information Administration, I believe is what that stands for. So these aren't our data. We just stuck our stuff in here. So 7.5 cents a kilowatt hour, 6.4 to 7.5 cents. Trades very favorably. We're just getting right out of the gate, and we trade very favorably with full duty gas, around 87% capacity factor. So that's pretty exciting to us because we think that the best way to implement renewable technology is to make it actually cost effective. Cost effective to us means it's either delivering the same product at less money or delivering more value at the same money. So we think this technology actually does both. And then several times cheaper than the other renewables. Now, one thing I want to point out about these numbers for solar ponds is it assumes it's predicated upon a fairly inexpensive salt source. So that again underscores the synergy between the Salton Sea and solar pond technology. If we had to go buy 150,000 tons of salt, say for $30-40 a ton for every megawatt we built, those numbers would go very quickly closer to those other renewable numbers. So the salt synergy is a very critical part of this. And of course, the solar pond power is again totally dispatchable. In fact, if I could just take a little deviation here, we think we're actually more dispatchable, better able to serve as a peaker than, say, for instance, gas. Because look here on capacity. This is full duty gas coming in around 6.6 cents. Greenfield cost. This is if you had to go build a plant. Compared to, say, 30% capacity factor, you see the price nearly double. And this is because you're having to ramp these gas turbines up and down from exhaust gas temperatures of 1,000 F plus. So it's really hard on the equipment, plus you have standby crews, et cetera. But our systems don't ever get even up to boiling temperatures, so we're a lot softer cycle, and we can ramp up just about the same time frame within a minute to 2 minutes that the gas plants can. So anyway, that particular flexibility comes in very, very handy. We think solar ponds have the potential to add a unique value to this grid structure, this infrastructure intermittency issue. You saw a lot about that yesterday. In fact, this slide looks a lot like one Carl Stills showed us, somewhat like it anyway. So what we're trying to indicate here, conventional renewables like the red curve indicating PV, good in the daytime, not so much at night. And wind flies very well at night, but typically droops in the heat of the day. So what we could configure the solar pond systems to do, rather than deliver base load, deliver on demand, to backfill these power gaps, if you will, and to deliver then to the grid a full base load delivery to the grid, sort of an integrated base load. That's the concept there. As I said earlier, currently this backfill function is being done by gas, and you saw the numbers, twice as costly as, say, full-time gas. So we actually could come in and provide, never mind the fact we're renewable, we can provide a cost savings to the gas peaking function. Oh, by the way, as an afterthought, we are renewable. So then the final delivered product there would be a total renewable delivery. Okay, so enough about solar ponds. A little bit on the approach we're proposing. Our concept for using solar ponds to help restore the Salton Sea would essentially accomplish these three outcomes, which I'll flesh out here in a few slides. Number one, cover the playa as it is exposed by the receding sea. Soon to be more of an issue as the QSA kicks in, the Quantification Settlement Agreement. And Bruce gave us a good background on what's happening there and how we need to address that issue. Number two, enable habitat management and Salton Sea restoration using available margins, financial margins of the power sales. And lastly, provide economic stimulus to the region via commercial activity versus government spending. Okay, number one, covering the exposed playa. And I think we're using two different models, maybe, Bruce, on the analysis. So these aren't our analyses. We've got it footnoted here. We've got these data. But analysis does show that by 2040, approximately 81,000 acres of playa will be exposed due to the shrinking sea, creating an ever-increasing dust hazard that some reckon could actually make the Imperial Valley ultimately uninhabitable, which would be a catastrophe, not just for folks here, but around the nation. We get a lot of food from here. As indicated on this chart, the key landowners are, of course, the IID. I think the legend, you probably can't make this out, but the IID, Imperial Irrigation District, BLM, and the Torres Martinez Indian lands up here are probably the major stakeholders and the landowners. And to our understanding, they have they're kind of on the hook to address this issue as it manifests itself. So simply put, we are proposing to cover the playa with solar ponds, and this can be done in an incremental fashion as the playa is exposed, conforming to the landscape, conforming to regional constraints, being able to adjust due to the modular flexibility. And I'll give you an example. What I mean by that adjustment. Let's say if you had an area you wanted to have interspersed wetlands with this solar pond array, it'd be very simple just to exchange a few of these grid cells for wetlands. They work very well side by side. The birds don't like solar ponds, so they don't bother that at all, and so they work very well together, in fact. Or if you wanted a geothermal well in one of these spots, say it's a 5-acre site, it's plenty enough for a drilling rig to set up and drill a good test. So very easy to accommodate other land use as we go forward. Okay, number two, the proposal would enable Salton Sea restoration and management. The concept is notionalized on this graphic. What we do is we take raw Salton Sea brine and distill it into saturated salt water, which we'd use to build the solar ponds with, and pure H2O distillate, which we could mix with other low-quality water to make usable water. By actually using what we're terming non-commercial or vented steam from the local geothermal operators. For those who took the tour on Wednesday, you probably saw the steam going up the stacks to the atmosphere, to the ambient, and it's that steam we're talking about. That's what we're calling non-commercial, kind of our words on that. We're using that steam as a thermal drive to drive a vertical tube evaporation distillation process. Then using available in-region water, either from groundwater or other sources, to mix with the high-quality distillate, as I said, to produce more available water, but also to return back to the sea whatever volume we're taking out. So if we take out a gallon of very high saline brine from the sea, we'll be putting back, say, a gallon of much, much less saline, almost very brackish water. So in that way, as we, on an ongoing fashion, we'll be sequentially freshening the sea. As we build these ponds and move forward, we'll continually be putting in fresher water, taking out saltier water, and that's the concept. Now, I do want to credit Sefton Water Technology for this concept. We got that from Tom Sefton and his team. So it's a really cool way to use the region's resources, non-commercial steam, otherwise unusable groundwater, to provide this freshening function. Lastly, this returning fresh water, or fresher water, I should say, could be actually released through those interspersed wetlands we discussed to do some really cool habitat management, maybe build estuaries and all kinds of neat things. So it's a concept that can be done, okay? I mean, it really can be done. Finally, the solar pond proposal would provide an economic stimulus to the region in the form of jobs and economic development. Our solar pond systems are typically more labor intensive than other power systems. We leave behind one permanent operator position per megawatt, of course, along with the construction jobs, probably just as many or more than PV or wind, and the so-called induced jobs. Capital development for the solar ponds is around $5 to $6 million per megawatt, and I want to caution to distinguish that from a PV megawatt. Again, this is a base load megawatt. It would take, say, 5 PV megawatts to produce the same amount of energy each year on an annual basis. So a goodly amount of funded economic stimulus to the region in addition to the restoring the sea and the wetlands. So in summary, the solar pond concept for the Salton Sea would cover the exposed playa and eliminate fugitive dust while allowing for interspersed wetlands and geothermal development, restore the Salton Sea to a desired salinity while enabling habitat management, and provide a true economic stimulus while reducing the region's grid inefficiencies, and all done with a commercial solution, no tax money involved. Let the power sales drive the whole thing. Okay, so for my get off the stage slide, let me just touch on this idea of an enterprise approach. Well, clearly, a solution to the Salton Sea is going to involve a wide array of stakeholders from the affected landowners, IID, BLM, the Torres Martinez folks, to the customers, affected communities. And I might just add in here a little vignette. Discovered recently a really cool synergy between the future Travertine Point project and the adjacent Torres Martinez tribal lands, where solar ponds developed on the tribal lands, enabling wetlands management, et cetera, could also provide power for completely power the Travertine Point community as it goes forward. So a completely on-demand green power source for that system. So it's a really exciting synergy. I think there's going to be more of those kind of manifest themselves as the solution goes forward. Then, of course, there's the government entities, federal, state, and local, and, of course, the all-important industry component, including the geothermal developers who would be conceptually supplying this non-commercial steam to make this whole thing work. Very important part. So the point of this, then, of course, there's us, Good Mechanics, and Sefton Water Technology. We're likely the smallest piece to the big puzzle here to make this whole thing work. We're bringing the enabling technology for sure, but it's obviously going to take an enterprise to make this go forward. And that's the point I want to leave you with in this slide, is that it's an exciting solution. However, it's going to take everyone's getting involved in it and owning a piece of it to make it work. So with that, I thank you for your time and attention.
Thanks a lot, George. Okay, our next speaker is Juan Delara. He's going to be speaking on the Salton Sea Action Committee and also give us an overview of Travertine Point development.
No, it's not working.
There you go.
Can you hear me? I need to do it from here because if I get up, I have to go to the bathroom. Anyway, buenos dias, Juan Delara. Let me start with our mission statement of the Salton Sea Action Committee. Salton Sea Action Committee exists to support efforts to effectuate the completion of the restoration of the Salton Sea and its region in order to prevent environmental collapse of necessary wildlife habitat, prevent airborne particulate disaster, create recreational and tourism opportunities, explore integrated clean energy restoration solutions, improve the regional economy, and preserve this great resource for future generations. So who are these guys that want to do this? I need to tell you that we have a stellar group of board members, and there are several in the audience. And I'm going to read their names because it's important for you to know who they are so that, as Supervisor Kelly put it, enough studies, let's take some action. And that's what Salton Sea Action Committee is all about. And we have some folks that are an example of folks that are bringing things to the table and not taking from it. Many times you join an organization and you're in it to benefit yourself. The folks that are on the board that come to the table are passionate about what they're doing in their private sector lives, but also are passionate about a greater good that will support their businesses, their companies, and their quality of life in the future. So I'm the president, starting with me. I represent Federated Insurance. Our structure, we have two vice presidents, one from Imperial County and one from Riverside County. And our first vice president is Dennis Rieger. He's with Executive Homes, ERA Incorporated. Second vice president is Alan Pace with Petra Geotechnical, and Alan is here. Our treasurer is Lee Osborne with Osborne Rincon. He's our treasurer, CPA, and he does all our accounting stuff. By the way, he does wear two hats. He's also a council member in the city of La Quinta. Our man, the guy that does all the heavy lifting, has done a lot of the heavy lifting. The guy that brought us together, Paul Quill, he's our secretary. He's in the audience. He's with Quill Enterprises. In fact, he's the project manager for Travertine Point. I'll touch on that a little bit later. Jeff Brothers with Soul Orchard has several projects here in the Imperial County and San Diego County. Brad Donay with RBF Consulting. Graham Donaldson with Cole Green. William Green with RBF Consulting. Jason Jackson with Desert Security Services, and he's also a council member in the city of El Centro. Matt Johnson, Wilson Johnson Commercial Real Estate. Some of you might have heard of a racetrack out in Desert Center. Matt Johnson owns that, and he's been a developer in the Coachella Valley for many, many years. But he actually came to, I think, the desert in Imperial County back in the early 70s. He worked for Unocal and worked in the geothermal industry. Randy Keller, Kell Energy, the largest owner of geothermal projects here in Imperial County. Jesse Montaño, Z Global. Vince Signorati with Energy Source. Andy Vossler, Landmark Golf from the Coachella Valley. If you know the Vossler name, it's synonymous with golf in the desert in the Coachella Valley. Bob Yellen, and I want to thank Bob for really taking the leadership and putting this thing together. And Doug Beers, who is a partner with Dennis Rieger. I'm going to take out a couple of these guys, pick on myself and Dennis Rieger to show you some of the activities, some of the things that they've done and are doing in and around the sea. And I'm going to start with Dennis. Dennis is a huge stakeholder in and around the sea. To date, he has invested $38 million. He owns and or controls 3,000 residential lots, some commercial buildings. The AMPM, that was an $11 million project that I'm sure the county of Imperial was very happy to see open and in operation. Some of his other investments, the Travertine Grill and offices, that was a $2 million investment. The former El Sol Market, which is now a 99-cent store, is about $2.5 million. So Dennis has a huge stake, and he's our first vice president, and he continues to invest. He continues to be bullish in the area and continues to work on his projects. And he's not deterred by the challenge of a dying sea. He sees an opportunity for him to participate in actually those restoration efforts, and that's why he's part of our group. He also owns the RV park at Johnson's Landing. It's about 108 spaces. He recently completed a self-storage project there that will house a lot of the toys that the guys come out with, their ATVs and their motorcycles and those kind of things that they need some services. And he and his partner, Doug Beers, have recently purchased a dredge machine. They're going to do some dredging out there to be able to bring boats out onto the water. And hopefully we'll create kind of a lake within a lake that'll have a little bit better water that people can actually do some boating and some recreational water type of activities out there. So that's one of our board members that is, like I said, investing and continues to invest in the area. Federated Insurance Company I work for, we're up to a little over $100 million in investments. We own 2,700 acres. We have just received approval. Thank you very much, Supervisor Terrazas and Kelly and Gary White. I saw him out there. He was very instrumental in helping us with that project. It's a 5,000-acre master planned new town, not a residential project. It's a new town that will that has or plans for 16,655 units and over 5 million square feet of commercial and industrial use. As a whole, it's the largest project ever approved in both counties, in Riverside and the Imperial County. We have also made big commitments to support the Salton Sea Authority in the formation of the Infrastructure Financing District, which is another piece of the puzzle for financing some of the activities around the sea. That'll probably be up there in the $200,000-300,000 range. So we're very vested, we're very committed, and we will be very bullish in that area for many years to come. So we're going to continue to put our money where our mouth is. Some of the things that the Salton Sea Action Committee has been involved in is being a part of the Salton Sea Authority's Finance Committee. And that committee is responsible for finding dollars to support Salton Sea Authority activities and projects and efforts. Recently, we supported the county and the two counties when they went to Washington, D.C. And paid for some brochures and those kind of things. And I've been told that if we wouldn't have done that, they would have spent many hours and probably days just looking for the money to pay for, just a couple $100 here, $300 there. So we're already doing a lot of things that are, the small things that are necessary to be able to bring about bigger things that we can sponsor and support in the future. We are a sponsor of, or will be a sponsor of the Salton Sea Historical. It's a Salton Sea exhibit at the Indian Arts Festival, Indian Wells Arts Festival in Indian Wells. So there are a lot of activities that we're taking on and will be in the future. Let me close by reading some of the other activities that will be taken on. The Salton Sea Action Committee is a not-for-profit organization incorporated in the state of California to support Salton Sea restoration efforts. The Board of Directors of the Salton Sea Action Committee sees the Salton Sea as a resource that cannot be lost. The organization seeks to support restoration efforts through various methods. Fundraising for the purpose of political lobbying on behalf of the Salton Sea restoration, grassroots political activism in support of ballot measures and local, state, and federal legislation that achieve the goal of Salton Sea restoration, grant applications for funding of various components of the restoration process, engaging in the contracting of experts and professionals for the purposes of resource master planning, including environmental, engineering, and design strategies, promotion and education of the Salton Sea Integrated Project and Salton Sea issues, answers and solutions, implementation strategies, support of academic and educational awareness of both Salton Sea issues and Salton Sea resource opportunities in an effort to attract student participation and potential creation of jobs, exploration of solutions tied to clean energy technologies that may reverse damage and or enhance the sea's vitality and restoration process. Through the use of these and other methods, the Salton Sea Action Committee envisions integrated solutions to the restoration of the Salton Sea, which will include long-term funding opportunities for both the infrastructure necessary to save the sea, as well as long-term maintenance of the sea. The resultant regional, environmental, and economic betterment will preserve and greatly enhance the livability of the Coachella and Imperial Valleys. Just in closing, again, no more studies. It's a call to action. I hope you will join us in this call to action. I've been told, or we've heard from several people, and there's a lot of science behind it, in particular, the USGS presentation by Dr. Doug Barnum that shows that a no action plan will cost $1.5 billion initially, just to deal with the environmental issues that will be created with a not restored sea or a dying sea. So it's really up to us to decide, do we want to take action or don't we? Do we want to put good money in today that will create more dollars and opportunities in the future, or do we just want to throw money at a bad situation that will not realize any opportunities or any more dollars for us, and even a lesser quality of life? So in closing, we are looking for more partners. We're looking for you to support us so we can support the rest of the folks that are working on the restoration of the sea. Hopefully we'll be seeing more of you in the future, and I want to thank Tim Kelly and all your staff for inviting me to speak here today.
Thanks a lot, Juan. Okay, do we have any questions from the audience? Micah?
You can tell I'm not a real electrician. I don't know mechanical things. I was wondering, in mentioning partners, what federal agencies are involved, and what the roles of those agencies are in this effort.
Last 6 months or so, or the last couple of years actually, is involving some of the federal agencies. Army Corps of Engineers, one of the things when we went back to DC is we met with them. There is some potential funding there. We were optimistic after coming back. There's some things we have to do with our partners here to develop more of a plan. You'll hear a little bit more about that in this next panel. We think Department of Interior, because they're one of the landowners, should step up and help with the funding. We did hear very clearly from Secretary Salazar and Senator Boxer when they were out here at the hearing that they were going to step up and help with some funding for projects like Red Hill Bay. Again, I think, and the Department of Interior has stepped up. We've been in contact with them off and on, as has U.S. Fish and Wildlife, and I think we will see something there. But again, the encouragement would be for everyone to remind their federal representatives that they do have a role in this, along with the state's role. And it is going to, I particularly appreciate the private sector contribution and the things that the private sector has done, and that some of the renewable energy things are going to do, but it is going to take some additional money from places like the federal government.
Okay, does anybody else want to add to that?
Senator Boxer's office has expressed, and we've been in contact with their office, and expressed huge interest and is very much pushing forward the Species Conservation Habitat Project that was mentioned earlier by Mr. Wilcox. And they are working with Army Corps of Engineers to get some funding for that project, and I believe Red Hill Bay. And they're also working through WRDA, the Water Resources. I'm trying to remember exactly what that stands for, but through the water bill from the federal government, they're working on some funding through that as well to be able to get money for the Species Conservation Habitat Project. And they're also contacting our budget subcommittee chairs in both the Assembly and the Senate to urge them to also pass the $12 million, I believe, that was requested for that project in the state budget as well. So, and that's something that we encourage the public to do as well, if that is a project that they support, which we've supported, and as Mr. Wilcox mentioned, IAD supports as well. If you support that bill, write to the Assembly and the Senate Budget Subcommittee chairs for the resources, which is Subcommittee 3 in the Assembly and Subcommittee 2 for the Senate, and let them know of that support. we want to keep that funding in the budget for that project.
I would just add, I would agree with that. The Species Conservation Habitat is a pilot project that's going to go a long ways towards proving some of the management we have to use in a long-term restoration, and it's incredibly important. And at least in my mind, the ball is in the state legislature's court. With some input from their constituents, hopefully we can get that moved forward.
Okay, are there any further questions?
Um,
Alan? Okay, go ahead, Paul.
Bruce, you showed the slide that had 2045 roughly there, and I keep hearing everywhere I go now that the future inflows into the sea, that any solution needs to be dependent on future inflows that are probably south of 500,000 acre-feet in the long term because of conservation efforts, transfers, climate change, etc. That scenario paints a little more dismal picture in the long term of a shrinking sea that's quite a bit smaller than the one you showed. I mean, is that...
Certainly there will be less inflow, and one of the points we've tried to make, ongoing points we've tried to make, is the fact that there will be less inflows. It's 700,000, again, these models are just that, models, and 700,000 acre-feet or thereabouts. In 2075, the model we just completed shows a slightly smaller sea than you saw there. I think what we showed for 2045 is relatively accurate, but your point's well taken, and I think it points to the fact that we need to look at some of the alternatives, and I appreciate the no more studies, I get it, and I'm kind of there with you, but I think we do have to spend some time, Salton Sea Authority and others, looking at what you could build given the inflows. You could build what we call a blue water lake. I think it would have to be smaller, and it would have to be, where it's located is up in the air, I guess. There's a couple places we think it's best, but so there is less inflow. That needs to be more in the equation. The state did look at shorter or smaller inflows, but I think the projections you saw and some of the numbers that George had, our latest model is updated to the latest information we've got. So I think it's reasonably accurate.
Okay, yes, Alan?
Yes, I wanted to ask Dr. Nitschke, congratulations on your very exciting technology.